Hi, it's Missy,
and April,
and this is Sheelanagig.
And to get started today, Missy, actually, I want to bring up something a little sad because I know you lost a Sheela in your life.
I did lose a Sheela in my life. That's a good way to put it. I did.
And can you just a few minutes? Missy goes on road trips, and I always reel her in.
Well, we were just joking about that. Because I said it's always like, April's trying to reel me in. It's always like,
tell us about your Sheela.
Yeah. It was my aunt. It was my dad's sister, who I've actually talked about on this very podcast before. I've mentioned her, Aunt Sharon.
And
she was just such a Sheela in my life, such an amazing woman. I was telling April her entire bathroom was decorated in seahorses, like from the floor to the ceiling. Like people just constantly gave her seahorses, and they were just all over bed. She loved Elvis Presley. She had an Elvis collection. She had a hand collection, a Budweiser collection, a Coca-Cola collection, a Shakespeare collection. She was a aficionado of Shakespeare.
And can I just interject something that she was a teacher, and she taught impoverished children. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to teach junior high school impoverished children Shakespeare, and the district said...
They said, no, these children don't have any interest in that. And she was like, well, they don't know it. How could they have any interest in something they know nothing about? And she decided to move forward with a program for Shakespeare for these impoverished kids in Detroit. And she was a school teacher there at this school for like over 30 years. And it's amazing.
Yeah. And they learned to dig Shakespeare.
Yeah, she became like friends, like some of her best friends or some of her former students, which I think is, bodes well for her as a teacher, for sure.
Yeah.
And she was just extraordinary. And I could go on and on about her, but I won't, for April's sake. But I did just lose her. It was really kind of shocking and kind of unexpected. And we went back and cleaned out her house. But it was lovely because we opened up her house to friends, and people just came and took mementos and took a shoe from the shoe collection, and a seahorse from the seahorse collection.
And when I got to the house today, Missy's daughter Ellery was wearing one of her Elvis T-shirts, from her Elvis collection.
Oh, it's a good one too.
It's
like, have you seen Elvis? And then it's like Elvis is the Pope, like Elvis is a punk rocker. Elvis is like, it's really funny. It's kind of a vintage shirt. It's a retro, I should say. But yeah. Anyway, it's been hard. It's been hard, and I do miss her, and I'm really grateful for having her in my life. She was the one who took me in when my parents couldn't handle me.
When she was a wild teen.
When I was like 16 and I got kicked out of the house, and like, who did I go to live with? My single Aunt Sharon, with no children, who had never had children, and she was amazing. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for asking about that.
Yeah, I didn't want to start this podcast without acknowledging her.
How are you, April?
I'm good. I'm doing fine.
Yes.
And I'm excited to hear who our Sheela is today.
Yes, and I do want to tell you about that. I kind of take the scenic route a little bit. The thing that I want to mention to you, which I think it's really fucking hilarious.
Yes.
So we got to listen back to these podcasts and make sure, we work with our editor and stuff. And I realized that I told like the same story of smoking opium twice. I'm like an old person. Like I told it the second time, like I once smoked opium. And you're like, really? Like we're both old people. Because that wasn't
Neither one of us remembered the first time.
Remembered the first time I talked about. And I only did it once.
No, now you've done it 3 times.
No, I've only smoked opium once, April.
But you've told the story now 3 times.
Okay, but now I've told the story 3 times. But I just thought it was hilarious because I'm like, oh my God, wait a second. Like,
are we repeating ourselves? So listeners, if you're out there and you're following us and you're hearing the same story, please excuse us. We're old.
We're old. It's OLD, man. Now, I always say I love my husband because one of my favorite things is he never remembers the stories I tell him. So I could tell him like the same story like 4 different times, and it's like a new story every time.
When my husband doesn't remember something, I'm pissed. So I love that. Yeah. So like he's not paying
attention. It gives me another opportunity to tell the story, which is one of my favorite things to do, is storytelling.
Storytelling. You're right.
I love the
You married the right man.
I guess I did.
So tell us who your Sheela is.
Oh my God. Okay, it's very exciting. Okay. So, I'm going to tell you about an amazing trans woman today that everybody should know about. Pretty extraordinary. Really extraordinary. Okay, so I'm going to put my glasses on.
Okay, well, she means business.
Her name was Roberta Betty Cowell.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And beyond, I mean, there's many things, but beyond all those things that are interesting, she was actually the first known person in Britain and among the first in the world to undergo pioneering gender reassignment surgery in 1948.
In 1948? Mm-hmm. I didn't even know they were doing the surgeries that early. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so tell more.
It's very fascinating. But she also had this amazing life beyond her transition. I mean, she just had this amazing life. And so I'm going to go and tell you a little bit about her life. I'm very excited to share her. And again, she was known as Betty. And she was arguably one of the most remarkable existences of the 20th century and paved the way for generations of trans people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And okay, you ready?
Yeah. So, wait a minute.
Yes,
I just need to pause and let this sink in because I didn't really think too much, silly me, about the pioneers of trans surgery.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like somebody's got to be the first one.
Yeah, and so thank you for covering her. Well, go ahead
and thank you to Betty.
Yes.
Because somebody had to be the first one, right?
Right.
Somebody had to be the first one, and that's a very brave thing to do. But think about how you pave the road for so many others when you're willing to be the first one.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, right?
All right. So tell us.
So, and again, the first one in Britain. First known person in Britain. Okay. So Cowell was a competitive race car driver. And having these races resulted in over 400 race wins and Grand Prix events throughout her life. She was also served as a decorated Spitfire pilot during World War II.
Ooh.
Was a POW.
So she was a he when this with the car racing and and the service and okay. Yeah.
Roberta Cowell was born Robert Cowell.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so so her early life, again, the competitive race car driving, the Spitfire pilot, POW, celebrated author.
Oh, wow.
So quite an amazing life.
That sounded like 3 lives to me.
Yeah, and that's a little bit how she looked at it. Like she was a celebrated author after her transition.
Okay.
She wrote about her transition.
Oh, wow. What was the name of her book?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
I should know it off the top of my head, but I don't.
I'm jumping ahead.
But she remained a pilot and a race car driver throughout her life, as much as she could. Because when you become a woman, the rules change.
I would imagine.
And the other thing I kind of want to point out about here is the fact that she made such a bold decision because she was doing things like racing cars and driving, these bomber planes. And, when you're a woman during that time in 1958, you can't do those things if you're a woman.
No. And I think what's interesting to me is you would associate those interests with very masculine behavior.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating that somebody who had those interests felt identified as a woman.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
But I just think about, and you'll see from the story here, she gave up a lot. Mm-hmm. She gave up a lot to become a woman.
Wow.
And it's too bad that she had to. She shouldn't have had to. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think, like, in this day and age, we're getting closer to closing that gap. You know what I mean? I'd like to think that. I know we still have a ways to go, certainly. But in 1958, that transition changed her life.
Wow.
I'm immensely. Sure. And she had to make that decision between these things she loved doing and these things and who she thought she really was. Mm. She had to make that decision, which is an incredibly bold decision. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because think about, she had to give up a lot. So anyway, We will jump in here. So again, she was born Robert Marshall Cowell and born in April of 1918. And she was one of 3 children to a very prominent London surgeon, Sir Ernest Cowell, and his wife Dorothy. Her father was actually a surgeon both in hospitals and as part of 2 world wars and a lecturer in human anatomy, and had worked as a private physician to King George VI, while her mother was a social worker.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you wonder if the father knew anything about this pioneering surgery or had any interest in it? What kind of surgeon was he?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't there's a lot less information out there about Betty than there should be.
Yeah.
I had to really dig for a lot of information.
And can I just say, listeners, when this lady says dig, she means business. We were putting together our research, and I would have like 4 or 5, reference points. She had like 20 to 30, and I'm not kidding because I had to type them all into our website.
Oh, thank you, April. She's ready to kill me. She's like, what is wrong with you?
When Missy says dig, she really digs. Yeah. Go ahead.
My husband's like, this is your ADD at its finest. Working smart, somebody who needs to work smarter, not harder. I'm like, but I can't help it. It's fascinating. I really do. I feel like it's that itch that's being scratched because I always loved, like in college, writing papers and research. And anyway,
we're going back to the topic. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, so Cowell's upbringing was typical of an upper middle class family of that period. Strict, religious, unforgiving, and where gender roles were, of course, set in stone. Mm-hmm. And Betty was a chubby child with glasses. And this is just terrible. She was nicknamed Circumference and Bottom.
Oh, gee.
Is that mean?
That is mean, even if you're a guy, and it seems less mean if you're a guy at that point, or a boy.
It's mean no matter what, April. It's mean no matter what. Yep. And at the school, she was left-handed, but she was forced to write with her right hand.
Oh, yeah, that was a thing back then.
That was a thing. I always think of my mother-in-law, who was left-handed. And her sister would always say to me, "Oh yeah, she burned her hand on a radiator as a child. She couldn't use her right hand, so she became left-handed." Yeah, because it was considered like a disability or something.
Well, my husband is left-handed, and they forced him to write with his right hand, and his handwriting is completely illegible.
Wow. Mike is also left-handed, which makes sense since his mother was left-handed, right? Yeah. My husband. Right. So yeah, I think that's all interesting. And I just want to say a little something about that. What we'll get to later. The fact that they forced her to write with her right hand was probably served her well in the long run, which I will get to.
Okay.
So even though that seems like counterintuitive and not a good thing to do, and we know that's not the right thing to do now,
right?
In this case, I think it may have served her, and I need to do a little more research about that. But anyway, so from the early age, Cowell was obsessed with cars, showed great mechanical ability. She would sneak into the pits of the banked Brooklyn Circuit, a neighborhood racetrack near her family home in Croydon to help the mechanics. She gained initial experience in the sport by wearing mechanics overalls and offering help to any driver or mechanic who wanted it. Cowell would attend an all-male public school, an experience she did not find enjoyable, as again, Roberta was often bullied by her interest.
By her interest, they were pretty traditionally masculine.
Yeah, but she went to like a very prep school, a very academic.
Okay, very
sort of like
highbrow.
all-male academic prep school.
Missy, was she? I mean, I'm not sure. I'm struggling right now if you should be referring to Roberta as him, because back then he was Robert. It was a male. But was he identifying that early as a female?
No. He was not identifying as a female early on at all.
It wasn't.
But I like to say the way I think about it.
Yeah.
And you listeners can let us know what you think. Mm-hmm. The way I think about it is that is who she was. You know what I mean? That's who she was.
That was her identity.
That's her identity from the time she was born. Okay. And she got to transition, which was wonderful. Mm-hmm. But she felt like a woman. And she grew to realize, even in retrospect, from the time she was very young,
that she felt like a woman.
She felt like a woman. But she knew she was a woman.
I'm so fascinated.
Say she felt like a woman. She knew she was a woman.
Because
so I am going to refer to her
as she. And I
You're
appreciate
right.
your clarifying that.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating is we tend to think of gender stereotypes, and all of um, Robert or Roberta's gender stereotypes are what we would think of as masculine, and here was somebody really feeling feminine and female.
Right.
I
And
love this.
she says,
This is amazing.
and that's another reason that she is just so interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too because she says at one point later in life that she realizes in retrospect that she purposely kind of steered herself toward those things to deny that feminine side.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
You know, ultimately they became real interests.
Yeah.
It wasn't like she was faking her interest,
Yeah.
but she pushed herself in that direction to deny this other part of herself.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So anyway, she was, bullied at this academic all-boys prep school because, she liked motor vehicles. And,
yeah.
but she did join, there was a motor group at the school, and she joined the motor group at her school, and she'd save up her lunch money to buy car parts.
Oh, wow.
And as she grew older, her interest would intensify, and she was determined to have a career in motorsports.
Mm.
And she soon became a race car driver in her own right, and then left school at the age of 16.
Had enough of that academic stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Really hands-on.
Yeah. And basically at this point, she knew she loved being a race car driver. Mm-hmm. She had, started with these preliminary races, nothing like super prestigious, but mm-hmm. Just starting out. And then she kind of also realized she had this interest in like planes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. It's the same kind of thing. It's like these moving vehicles. Mm-hmm. And she decided, just kind of for her betterment, that she would apprentice at General Aircraft Limited as an aircraft engineer in 1935.
Well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And her ambition at that point became to become a fighter pilot.
Wow.
And,
which it sounds like she did.
She did. Yeah. She did. But she was found to suffer from acute air sickness and was deemed permanently unfit for further flying duties with the RAF. Oh. That's a little bit of a bummer,
Yeah, I'll say.
What she said, though, that she was not very upset about this. Like, compared with motor racing, she would later say, I found flying a bore.
Yeah. I love that. I found flying a bore.
Compared to motor racing, April,
That's flight. That's great.
That would scare the shit out of me. Being in a race car.
Yeah.
Would that scare the shit out of you?
That would definitely scare the shit out of me.
Not my cup of tea. Nothing thrilling or exciting. It's like a roller coaster. Nothing thrilling or exciting about that for me. I feel like I'm going to die. Why is feeling like you're going to die any fun? I don't know. Cowell would continue to compete in racing competitions and fall in love with cheering crowds and the power that came from the cars she drove. Mm-hmm. She began attending University College of London in 1936 and studied mechanical engineering, where she would also compete in speed racing events.
So wait a minute. She didn't finish high school, but she was able to go on to college.
Apparently. I think it was more about maybe how intelligent you were.
Uh-huh.
I think, and the fact that when she left high school, she went on to be an apprentice engineer.
True. Yeah.
I mean, I think you'd have to be pretty smart.
I would imagine.
To be able to do that.
Yep.
So I'm sure there was some kind of, and maybe she did graduate from high school and I just kind of missed that little part, but who knows? But anyway, by the time she was 20, she owned 3 sports cars and she was motor racing every weekend. And she had competed in the 1939 Antwerp Grand Prix.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. She was also a prolific dater.
Oh.
Going from woman to woman.
Okay.
In search of the next exhilarating experience. It was clear to see that Cowell was an adrenaline junkie and was seeking more and more thrills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely had that adrenaline kind of passions.
Yes. I am not an adrenaline.
Including women.
Yes. I am not an adrenaline junkie. No.
Me either.
No.
I like my feet on the ground. But anyway,
yes,
we're not talking about me.
So
go ahead.
From then until the outbreak of World War II, she continued to study engineering at UCL and followed her passion for automobile racing. And during a posting I like a posting.
A posting.
I had to look that up because
Yeah.
I'm like, what is a posting? And apparently it's just like a showing or a visitation or a. So in a posting in Cambridge, Cowell married fellow racing driver and UCL engineering student Diana Margaret Zelma
Oh, wait.
Carpenter.
So she married another race driver, a woman.
A woman.
A woman race driver. Very
But
cool.
the women at this time, they could race, but they couldn't really compete.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, she was a race car driver, but she couldn't compete in the Grand Prix, for instance.
Oh.
So you could, you could dip your toe in.
But you really couldn't play like the boys.
Right, you couldn't play like the boys.
Gotcha.
And Carpenter, though, maybe another Sheela for us, she in herself was a trailblazer, as she became the first woman to graduate with a degree in mechanical engineering from UCL.
Wow.
Ooh, another Sheela right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you know how we heard earlier that Cowell was unfit to fly.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So despite that, that earlier dismissal from his flying duties, or her flying duties, she was allowed to return to the RFA in 1942. And the reason was because they really needed people. Needed people.
You know, I was wondering how she became a POW, and it makes sense.
Right.
They needed flyers.
They did. They did. And, you know, little Dramamine. Did they have Dramamine then? I don't know. But,
I don't know.
But it basically, they kind of recognized her skills, flying combat and aerial missions in Spitfires and other aircrafts. That same year, Cowell's daughter Anne was born, and then in 1944 came her second daughter Diana.
Oh, wow.
So pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Got married, 2 daughters pretty quickly, all in the midst of like World War II beginning and, you know, starting to, you know, fly these reconnaissance missions. So interesting time.
That's an interesting time. You talk about plenty of adrenaline.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's the real adrenaline right there.
Yep.
All right. So she returned to the skies, of course, once more to become that pilot and served on the front line.
Oh, wow.
In a Spitfire squadron. For those of you who don't know, Spitfire actually is a particular type of bomber plane. But it's interesting because a friend of mine who's pretty knowledgeable about flying and whatever, I was so excited, and I was telling him a little bit about Roberta Cowell, and he was like, wait a second, you can't fly a Spitfire if you're left-handed. That would be really difficult.
Oh.
And I said,
the right hand.
Right, and I'm like, really? That would be difficult? And I said, well, this makes sense then, because, and this is why I said we get to this. Yeah. And again, for a little further research needed, but I thought that was interesting because probably that right-handed training served her well in terms of being a Spitfire pilot, apparently, according to my friend.
And just for full disclosure, when you said Spitfire, I thought you were just being descriptive of this person, like they were dynamic, they were a Spitfire, but that's literally...
They were flying Spitfires.
Spitfires.
Yeah.
Learn something.
It's a good name. It's a really good name for a little bomber plane. Yep. Okay, so... So at this time, like I said, the war had started, and, you know, Cowell started flying these, you know, in the Spitfire squadron and was assigned to aerial reconnaissance over Nazi Germany. Different occupied territories.
Yeah.
And battle, danger, and near escapes from death also marked these years in Roberta's life as she served in the Second World War. She flew these, again, these Spitfires, and it was basically a camera-equipped plane. They were camera-equipped planes, so they could actually, you know how you see sometimes those videos of, you know, old videos of like bombing?
Yep, and you see the bombs coming down
from a Spitfire.
Wow, interesting. We're learning so much.
I know, right? And during one incident, the plane's oxygen system malfunctioned at 31,000 feet.
Oh, gosh.
Roberta lost complete consciousness, and the plane flew unpiloted for upwards of an hour in German airspace.
Oh, my gosh.
And she lived to tell about it.
Whoa.
And then, fortunately, she suddenly woke up and was able to steer the plane.
She suddenly woke up.
Yeah. Yeah. My God, It's been flying on its own for an hour. Like when I read that, I was like, how does that happen?
How does it, right? Exactly.
It seems like if you know, but I mean, I know there's like a lot of they call it autopilot, right?
But it goes to show you how advanced the technology was back then.
Even back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
But the fact that, you know, and she didn't get here she is flying over Nazi Germany occupied territories.
Yep.
She didn't get shot out of the sky.
No.
She was unconscious for an hour. Comes to and says, "Oh shit!
Oh, gee, I guess I better start
God,
flying this plane again."
How long have I been asleep? I'm flying a plane. It's pretty remarkable. So then she was able to steer the plane to an RAF landing spot, fortunately. But as she said, narrow escapes were a daily event. She wrote this in her autobiography and talked about her service. She also flied these planes, very similar, called Tiger Moths, Miles Masters. So they were 3 types of planes she flew, mostly the Spitfires, but also for those plane aficionados out there, also flying Tiger Moths and Miles Masters. And Cowell claimed that she knew that every day could be her last. And several of her closest friends were killed, and she regarded it as just a matter of time before she was killed, as far as she was concerned.
I wonder if she was more reckless or willing to be vulnerable because she wasn't fully herself, or maybe
maybe because she wasn't living her like fullest life. She wasn't authentic. She wasn't living authentically. That's an interesting way to look at it.
I don't know if it's true, but it's something to think about.
Right. I would really want to read her autobiography.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure some of that is explored a little bit.
Yeah.
I would be curious about that, That's interesting. But after the Allied D-Day landings in Normandy in June of 1944, she flew at a Belgium air base and was shot down by ground fire over Germany and captured by the Nazis.
We knew she was going to be captured because you mentioned she was a
POW. It's D-Day.
Oh, yeah.
She gets captured, right after D-Day. It's crazy. And so the flight, she said, had been scheduled as her very last trip.
Oh, no.
Of her second tour of operations.
Wow. How crazy is that?
And it ended up being her last flight of the war.
Oh.
But can you imagine, I get to go home now to my family, or, whatever, to my life, to my race car driving. I'm done. I've served my time. Oh, no. On the last day, last flight.
How long was she a prisoner?
Not that long.
Oh, good.
Fearing that her captors would treat her harshly, she twice sought to escape and twice failed. So she was put in solitary confinement in a tiny cell containing a plank bed and a very small thin blanket. And she spent 3 weeks in there, claiming it was absolute hell. But then she was eventually transferred to a POW camp in North Germany, and she remained a prisoner of war for 5 months.
Okay, so that's
5 months. But
I'm sure 5 months is a very long time when you're a POW. 5 months is
probably more like 5 years or 10 years.
Right.
And just think about having
horrible.
Yeah, and you don't really know your fate from day to day. It's fucking frightening.
Yeah.
So she passed the time, though, by teaching auto engineering and mechanics to the other prisoners.
Of course she did. That's
She
amazing.
did. Yeah.
Right?
So she realized, she was a good teacher. And she was like, why don't I share my knowledge? We're not doing anything else. And so, and then as the war neared its ending, the camp's food resources diminished and starvation began to claim some of the lives. So she lost some of her friends. And during that time, the already very thin Roberta lost 50 pounds.
Wow.
So she was a skeleton.
Oh.
It's crazy. Yeah. So that was really tough. And then finally, in May of 45, as German forces surrendered, their captors abandoned the facility, leaving it unguarded until Soviet troops liberated it. Within days, Cowell and other British captives had been flown home and returned to their home countries.
Wow. That's quite talk about an adrenaline rush. I'm sure one she would have skipped.
Yeah. And how surreal.
If she could have. Yes.
How surreal it must be, once you return home.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. That's a whole nother can of
post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just, probably some guilt, too, for, her friends who died in the camp.
And she survived. Yeah.
It's very sad. It's very sad. But within a year of being released from the prisoner of war camp, Cowell was back racing. She also established Cowell, Whittet and Company Lightwater, a business that both tuned and developed cars.
Of course. It has something to do with cars. That was inevitable.
Happiness, she claimed, however, became alien.
Oh.
Roberta Cowell was consumed by depression. linked to the constant trauma that she experienced during the war and a growing discomfort with her body.
Wow. Okay.
So Roberta's personal life began to break down just a few years after the war. By 1948, she had separated from her wife and left her family to seek help. Sadly, she would never see her daughters again.
Oh, no.
Yeah. This is a very sad part of this story.
Oh.
And I will get to that, but this is a very sad part of her story. She left and she never looked back.
Oh,
she
wow.
Her, you'll see one of her daughters did try to reach out to her too, and she
didn't respond.
She didn't.
Wow.
I think she just felt so alien probably. And we'll get to that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later.
Oh, okay.
But she started to seek the help of a psychiatrist who helped her to identify one of her causes of her internal conflict. And what she started to realize is she was having this extreme struggle with her gender identity.
Mm.
And the revelations were so disorientating that she contemplated suicide.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. She just, she felt hopeless. She just didn't know, what to do. She began to realize that her excessively masculine life up to that point had been an attempt to hide what she knew deep down inside, though not consciously, was that her nature was essentially feminine. And in some way, that her world was completely out of joint.
Wow. It's interesting that as she begins to get in touch with that feminine side of herself, she's able to release her daughters. And it makes me question what I'm thinking about when I think about what is masculine and what is feminine, because that goes with a lot of stereotypes that may not be true for her.
I know. It's true.
Really makes you look at that and question that.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, apparently she was never like the maternal type.
Mm. And lots of women
A lot of people say like her personality really didn't change.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like she was a woman, but she was still the same person, you know, and her interests were the same. And she really just didn't have like a maternal bone in her body.
Mm.
I don't think she really had a paternal bone in her body either. I don't think she was a great father either, from what I understand. You know,
it sounds like she was gone for the war,
right?
And,
for a good deal of it, she was gone. But you're right; it does kind of make you think about gender roles and
stereotypes that go with those.
And I'm sure in some ways she must have thought like that was a different person. That was the father of these girls. Like I want to disengage from that life.
Also, I think trans people today do struggle with societal judgments, and I wonder if she felt like her daughters wouldn't accept her, or wouldn't, or maybe that she didn't want them to know. I mean, did they know?
Right. No, they did. They ended up finding out, and the mother apparently, was pretty devastated and said some pretty harsh things. And there's like one thing where it talked about like how her wife's family had said, Robert was always such an exhibitionist. He was such a narcissist. He just chose to do this for attention.
Wow.
Anything for attention. And like, what a great stunt this is.
A gender.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Transition surgery.
Get some attention. I think I'm going to have a gender reassignment. You know what I mean? It's so preposterous. But that is apparently, like, that was kind of the thought, like, of her family.
Wow.
And
got to explain it away somehow.
Right. And kind of what they taught the daughters, too. Yeah. Like, this is just a publicity stunt because this is who your dad was, again, which is preposterous. But so anyway, it was during therapy that she discovered that her unconscious mind was predominantly female, and soon the bravery that she poured into racing and flying flowed in a different aspect of her life, transitioning.
Wow.
Which served her well.
Yeah.
Like I said, she was obviously a very brave person.
Strong-willed.
Yeah. Loved a challenge, loved, So it served her well.
Yeah.
In that sense, So she began reading British physician Michael Dillon's groundbreaking book, which was a scientific philosophical work which sympathetically considered homosexuality and gender identity, which at that time was totally radical.
I'm sure. It's
it,
not considered unradical in some ways today. I mean, there's just a lot of...
We have a lot of growth to do.
Yes, we do.
We do. But, for those days, it was quite,
pretty big stuff, yeah.
So, Cowell wrote to Dylan and asking for help to find doctors to facilitate her transition. And during their first meeting, which Cowell said will be crystal clear in my memory for the rest of my life, Dylan immediately confided in her that he was also transgender.
Oh, wow.
In fact, he had been the first known transgender man to undergo gender affirmation surgery.
Wow.
And he was formerly known as Laura Maud Dillon.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was interesting because although he was addressing this in this book, he wasn't outwardly saying, I'm a transgender man. But instead, addressing these issues and sympathetic to these issues, but not brave enough to quite put it out
really
there.
say,
And he was studying to become a doctor and wanted to be a revered doctor and well known.
Didn't want that to
so he didn't want that stigma either.
Right.
And so that's another totally fascinating tributary that you may choose to go down, which I did for a little bit, is Michael Dillon. Michael Dillon is fascinating. So anyway, under the treatment of Dylan, Cowell began taking large doses of estrogen. And this is crazy. Later, Michael Dillon would illegally perform her first gender confirmation surgery on Cowell.
Oh, wow.
He wasn't even a doctor yet.
Oh, wow.
Which is why it was definitely illegal.
Illegal, yeah. And what a leap of faith for
again,
Cowell.
Yeah. You think this was a publicity stunt? You know? Yeah, you're going to like have somebody operate on you that is like never done this surgery before and is not even a doctor.
Well, again, it speaks to that recklessness or willingness to just lay it all out on the line that we saw in Cowell throughout her life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, Roberta, of course, threw everyone for a loop. She was a pilot.
Yep.
She was a race car driver, a veteran. She had children.
She was POW,
right.
Married with
Prior
kids,
to her transition, she had been a man's man.
Right.
Further challenging society's narrow definitions of male and female.
Wow.
People were in shock.
I bet.
Yeah.
Not to mention it wasn't a common surgery.
And she was somewhat known as a male race car driver. Known, there was a certain
she had
notoriety.
A reputation as a he,
right?
And
some wins and some notoriety, and so somebody's name had been in the paper.
Right.
So it wasn't like she could just go, okay, I'm just going to abandon Robert Powell and this new person is going to appear. She had to let people know, like people had to know what was going on, and so she made it public knowledge, what she decided to do.
Which is in itself really an interesting choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It is an interesting choice.
In some ways, it's easier to understand the guy who did the surgery wanting to not out the fact that he's a woman, and as a gender male, I should say. Yeah. So it's really interesting that our Sheela was so willing to share.
Right.
Her transformation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which again is paving an amazing path once again.
Yes.
For the transgender community.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so Cowell and Dylan developed an extremely close bond. And for Cowell, this was a friendship. But Dylan became romantically involved.
Oh.
Essentially, he fell in love with Cowell.
Wow.
Which was really difficult.
Another, dimension to...
In the words of Lanford Wilson, unrequited love is such a bore. Yes. Okay, so
can I ask?
Yes.
Is Roberta, as a female, interested in romantic relationships, and B, would it be with other women or with men? Was that made clear?
Not
really. I'm jumping ahead.
You are jumping ahead.
Okay, sorry.
She's always jumping ahead.
I'm just curious. You're telling a great...
We'll get to that.
All right. I will be patient.
We'll get to it.
Oh, speak one. Wise one.
Okay, so so it was interesting too to go on a little bit more about Michael Dillon, this now male doctor,
Right. Or non-doctor becoming a doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
Performing illegal transgender surgeries, but we won't harp on that.
Only on the love of his life.
On the love of his life.
Okay.
Okay.
And by the way, it was successful. There were no glitches.
Wonderful.
Everything went well.
Power to the doc.
Thank God.
Yes.
That had to be a very scary surgery. But, it wasn't even done like in a hospital either.
Oh, where was it done?
In an office? I think it was done like at his home.
Oh my. Wow.
Don't quote me on that, but I think it was not in a hospital because it was illegal.
Right.
And he wasn't a doctor.
Yeah. those were two pretty serious problems.
Oh my God. This just sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? Oh God.
Except it worked, so
exactly.
It was successful. So yeah, it was happy ending.
Powell had been like dodging, danger his whole life.
Right.
Think about it.
Yep. Why
not? He falls asleep at the wheel in a plane. He's a POW. He's racing cars.
Racing cars. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this was just one more danger.
Challenge and the adrenaline rush in the journey.
Yes.
Of life.
Yes. I'm sorry, my children are closing the doors in the background. I apologize. Okay. Oh, you know what I want to point out really quick, which we have not even acknowledged?
Yeah.
My husband, Mike, got us a second microphone.
Yay, Mike. We are very grateful to Mike for our mics.
Let me tell you why. So we listened to the Zelda episode.
Yes.
And
Zelda
April,
Fitzgerald.
you can barely hear April.
Aww.
And, Dana even tried to, turn her up, and still, it's not good. It's I don't know why in that episode, because I think the other ones we've been able to compensate.
Yeah.
I haven't felt that about any of our other episodes.
No.
Yeah, so Mike was I cannot handle it. I've got to get you another mic.
Shout out to Mike Flanagan. Thank you for the mic, Mike.
And he set it up for us, too.
And he did. Very patiently.
He's a mensch of a man.
He's
I
great.
have to say.
Oh, yeah.
I love my husband.
I love your husband, too.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love your husband, too, in his own right.
In his own special. What did he say? I'm semi-supportive of you, aren't I? But we digress. Let's go back to Roberta.
We're allowed to digress a little. It's okay. It's okay. I just remember the one time I was at your house and he was like, Missy, I don't hate you. And I'm like,
Well, just to put a little context, Missy had brought in tons and tons of clothing, and my husband likes everything neat and tidy and in its place, and he just couldn't fathom what we were doing with these racks of clothing, and he wasn't overly supportive. I would say he was less than semi-supportive on that date. But let's go back to our Roberta, Sheela.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And in the end, he actually was, very nice about it, and he's still very nice.
He got over it.
Because anyway. Okay, so we're talking about their unrequited love here, and so this is what's interesting about him. So Dylan, that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he intentionally created a reputation of himself as a misogynist.
Oh, interesting.
To prevent any woman from developing interest in him.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
He was more afraid of being, labeled a homosexual or asexual.
I think Roberta's, I think it just ignited him. The fact that Roberta was, out there living this life. I think he wished he could have done that. And he couldn't. So he was able to, fly with her wings, the Erica Jong wings we refer to.
Right.
I think that was really empowering to him to see this woman who is bold and willing to live this life and show who she was.
Put it all out there.
And be authentic.
Yeah.
So, but he also believed that Cowell's level of interest would make a perfect match, in terms of the two of them. The two of them would be the perfect match because they both understood each other. They had both been through the same surgery. Mm-hmm. They had both experienced being the other sex.
Right.
I mean, it's very interesting to think about.
It is interesting.
But this remained an unrequited attachment, sadly. And it's interesting, too, because a little bit was Cowell mentions, in her book that which, yeah, we'll get to that too. But mentions kind of that really Dylan wanted her to be like he wanted her to change, though. In order to have a relationship with her, he was like, it's time for you to be a woman. It's time for you to be a stay-at-home wife. It's time for you to show off how beautiful you are and go shopping.
Those weren't her interests.
Right. And she was like, okay, so you're supposedly in love with me and you want us to be a couple, but you want me to completely change who I am. I'm not willing to do that. So that got in the way too, obviously.
And elevating our Sheela in this moment, good for her.
I know.
Not to compromise on who she was and what she wanted out of her female life.
Thank fucking God, right? Yeah. So the relationship details are somewhat ambiguous. There is clearly a deep affection between them, in terms of both of them.
Right.
But again, Dylan is more of this romantic attachment, and Cowell is much more of this deep friendship attachment. But they both admit they love each other very deeply, right?
Yeah.
And so there's all these very many gushing letters from Dylan to Cowell, which are full of declarations of love and even hints of sexual intimacy. And Dylan ended up proposing to Cowell in 1951 and started making plans for the wedding.
Oh, wow.
Again, just... See, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, suddenly he is just like, he's being a misogynist.
Right, trying to
He's being his misogynist, this misogynist character that he tried to create. Like, okay, we're getting married. You don't have a say in it. I'm going to start making plans, and you're going to be my housewife. Cowell's like, what the fuck is going on, right?
Not happening.
Right. So, of course, Cowell turns him down. And Cowell wrote, although I liked and respected him very much as a person, there was no possible way I could ever think of marrying him. And the idea of settling down and becoming his housewife, no way.
Not happening.
No way. Not happening. So in one letter to Cowell, Dylan wrote, my dear Bobby, as he liked to call her. He always called her
My dear Bobby.
Yeah. I need to have 2 whiskeys in me before I could start off. My beloved Bobby, as I have never called anyone that before.
Oh.
Another one reads, safe at home with a mixture of feelings, very happy one way, yet missing you.
Oh.
It's like that. I think it's like that thing of like being with a person but still missing them.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're not able to fully engage in the relationship the way you want to.
Definitely.
Isn't that sad?
It is sad.
There's a lot of sadness here. And there's no doubt that Michael... was just clearly in love with Roberta. And it's hardly surprising, though, because Roberta was this incredibly charismatic, amusing person. People said that she was incredibly funny. She had these great one-liners. And a lot of people were very captivated by her.
Interesting.
The press was very captivated by her.
I bet.
If you look online, there are a lot of pictures of her. A lot of pictures of her. And she had these lovely, golden, tresses. She was very and very dramatic, But Cowell put boundaries in place.
Somehow that doesn't go with the image of the race car driver, but okay.
I think she was very conflicted.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of her choices were very fluid. What we would call fluid now, And that's okay.
Yep.
Because that's the thing. Why does there have to be these gender roles and these, she really challenged that.
Yeah, she did. She's
somebody who just
continues to do that. Yeah.
So again, Cowell put boundaries in place with Dylan, and by this time was forming a friendship with a woman named Lisa Morel, unbeknownst to Dylan.
Oh.
So it's interesting now.
So Roberta is interested in women. Which was consistent. He married a woman and,
Yeah.
And you said that back in the day, he had a real appetite for women.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
So that's interesting, right? Again. So, and what's crazy is there's so freaking little on their relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Very, very,
I wonder if that was the
little.
time, because we were in a time, the press was less invasive, I think, about people's personal lives, and it was so easy to have a scandal about couples holding hands or,
right.
that kind of thing. We're much more graphic today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So Yeah, so and it's like the one thing you can find pictures of the two of them together.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just not a lot of information, a lot of dead ends.
Interesting.
A lot of dead ends there. What I can tell you, though, is, whatever Cowell's true feelings were, Dylan was certainly deeply infatuated and in love and used his medical knowledge to lovingly realize her wish to transition.
Huh?
And in 1951, Cowell underwent another gender affirmation surgery, this time carried out by Sir Harold Gillies. This procedure was the first of its kind in Britain.
Oh, wow.
So that's the surgery that was like the first of its kind right there. And that was done in a hospital by a doctor.
Yeah. And it was legal.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So I should have made that clear. So there was a couple of
stages.
Surgeries. There was a couple stages there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So on May 17th, 1951, Roberta was officially and legally a female.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Even her birth certificate was amended to show she was female.
That's pretty progressive for that era.
That's very progressive.
It must have been, but of course it wasn't in our country. It was in Europe.
Right. Right.
But that it was a real, I guess it's my ignorance. I didn't realize that there were gender affirming surgeries and laws to accommodate that transition.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you could have like you said, is very progressive. That you can
so
I don't know what the rule is these days. I don't know. That, again, I would be curious about that. If you can change your birth certificate.
I would imagine you could. I would think so. Yeah. But I was just interested. I'm curious to know when the surgery became legal in this country in the practice of transitioning.
We might have to look that up.
I think we should.
Yeah, I think we do some. There's a lot of further research here. Mm-hmm. Like I said, this took me a very long time. And it's because all those tributaries that I went down. I think I have 37 listed sources for this one. Sorry. I'm sorry.
And we still have more questions.
I know. That's what I mean, though. But, okay, so this is the thing. So, like I said, May 17th, 1951, officially, legally a female. And sadly, Roberta would end her relationship with Michael Dillon and cut off all ties shortly thereafter. So a lot of people saw it as this opportunistic thing.
Well, except for if he was so in love with her and dominating and contrling.
Exactly.
Maybe
exactly.
not
There's two sides to every story, and you've heard about, whatever.
Right.
And, who knows? Who knows if it would have been different? It could have been different.
Right.
I don't know. But Dylan was very devastated because when I say, that she cut ties, she really cut ties. She was like, I never, I don't know if she said, I never want to talk to you again, but she essentially just ghosted him, disappeared. And he was devastated.
Aw.
It's very sad, right?
Yeah.
So, I love this. I can't remember where I quoted this from. It's in our credits, but Roberta's soft golden locks belied her swashbuckling personality. And before too long, her sexual reassignment didn't stop her from getting back into the cockpit, both on the ground and the sky.
I love it.
Isn't that amazing? So good.
Yeah.
So she was on the racetrack at Silverstone Daily and extravagantly purchased let me see if I can say this correctly, a de Havilland mosquito plane. And I may have said that wrong, I'm sorry. In which she planned to cross the Atlantic.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. That never quite worked out, actually.
Oh, sorry.
But initial interest from a curious 1950s society brought respectable publicity and money, and she even graced the cover of Picture Post.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As a woman.
As a woman. She continued to be the subject of public interest in the 1950s after news outlets published articles about her history as a racing driver, a war hero, a POW, as well as her gender-affirming medical journey.
Well, that certainly is a very interesting personality.
Yeah, if I was a journalist, I would be all over that shit.
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, that would be
in fact, you are a podcast journalist.
I am a podcast
and you are all over it.
I'm all over that shit, man. I'm so all over that shit, right? Right. So, but by 1954, Roberta was in need of money. So she started numerous business ventures, though many would falter. The hormones and the lavish lifestyle she enjoyed came at a cost. And this is what's sad. There was no money coming in from, yes, she was racing and like her ex-wife was doing. Remember we talked about that?
And
but she could dip her toe in.
Right.
This became what Roberta could be. So with no money from former motor sport winnings coming in, because she couldn't compete anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Her businesses were collapsing around her, and the world would come to know Roberta Cowell by face and name after selling her story to Picture Post magazine for a sum of which would be equivalent to $290,000 today.
Okay, I guess she was able to resolve her.
Yes.
It's a good thing she was open with her story and her life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. Like she was just, although she was racing and doing the things she loved with no money
She
coming
couldn't make money at it
No,
anymore.
she couldn't make money. But she had all this publicity. So when they came to her and said, we'll give you $290,000, she was like, yeah, okay,
Sure.
that works. I'll do that. And again, I think she was eager to share her story.
Yeah, and her story is a gift and an inspiration.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's go back to Michael Dillon.
Okay, if we must.
Yes. Who she dumped.
Who she dumped, yeah.
Okay. So he found... So in the midst of all this, let me just say that, of course, she was in this major magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And what did she do when she was in this major magazine?
She outed him.
She outed him.
Oh.
She exposed Michael Dillon.
Whoa.
She praised him.
Yeah.
For, helping her find who she really was and to explore becoming that.
But he didn't want to be outed.
He didn't want to be outed.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite devastating to him.
I bet.
And he had no choice in the matter.
Did he sue her?
No.
He didn't sue her?
No. Instead, he retreated from his colleagues for 10 days after the news broke, and he contemplated suicide.
Oh.
But shortly thereafter, he left Britain for India. And in the 1950s, the late 1950s, he became a Buddhist monk.
Okay.
This
story just keeps on going.
This is every possible. It's got a Buddhist monk. It has a Spitfire plane. It has, like
POW.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Transitioning males and females.
Yes.
Like this story's got it going on.
Quite a story.
Okay. But at the age of 47 in 1962, his death came about, and it was unexplained, but basically they kind of chalked it up to malnourishment and typhoid fever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's sad.
That is sad. That was sad.
But you never know. Maybe he went on to be quite overjoyed as a Buddhist monk.
Maybe
We'll that was know. And I know he has written books as well. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that for a minute. He wrote a very interesting trans pioneer book.
Oh.
In his own right.
Okay.
So again, definitely check him out. He wrote a book called Out of the Ordinary, which is considered to this day a landmark publication that sets free a distinct voice from the history of the transgender movement.
And in that book, does he acknowledge himself as a trans?
But he only wrote that book after being outed.
Oh.
But maybe in a way, again, maybe that was a good thing. Maybe he needed to be authentic. Maybe maybe that's what caused him to transition into becoming a Buddhist monk. Like maybe, you know what I mean? Things kind of happen for a reason sometimes. Sure. I mean, maybe they don't always, but you know.
You wonder.
Yeah.
And maybe he did a lot of service by writing that book.
Yeah.
To the trans cause.
He did.
And creating more.
He did. People consider it quite a remarkable book. So
it was an important contribution.
It is. So in 1954, Roberta also moved in with close friend and assumed lover, Lisa Morrell. Mm-hmm. And I know I mentioned her previously. He had actually met her during his bouts with depression. He had met her, and they had become friends, but I think that relationship kind of developed. Mm-hmm. And the two would home 30 cats together.
They became
and lived together. They did. They became crazy cat ladies together.
Oh, that's touching.
I know. And so... yeah, and so they...
I want to say, I hope that didn't sound patronizing.
No, it didn't. It was just kind of funny.
It's nice.
It was just kind of funny. And another thing I didn't bring up earlier, and I shouldn't because it's it's kind of distressing. Little trigger warning here for you cat lovers. During his time in war, he always loved animals, and he was forced to eat cats.
Oh.
It got to the point where they were like starving.
We're moving on.
So they think part of the reason that he ended up being like he started rescuing cats and like he They think it was like his way of giving back
sad.
after he was kind of like in this position where the only thing they could find to eat were cats, and like he felt so bad about it that in his latter life he kind of opened this, like his house is like a cat sanctuary essentially. So they were together for 30 years, and other than that, I found very little information about their relationship. So again, if anybody wants to share some Lisa Morel information with us, we would love that. If you happen to be related or know more about her, I'm sure she was a remarkable woman in her own right. She kind of had to be. So we'd love to hear more. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so Cowell's biography, it's called Robert Cowell's story. I'm sorry, it's called Roberta Cowell's story, was dedicated to Lisa. And would bring her even more money to the tune of $54,000 in today's money. So made more from the post than from the book, but again, finding ways to bring in money, and also empowering people with her writing. So it wasn't all about, just like, oh, I gotta make a buck here.
Right.
She was, creating a pathway. Through sharing her experience. So it was a really important book because of its place in transgender history and LGBTQ history more generally. Cowell continued racing, even being allowed at some point to compete and winning the Chelsea Walsh Speed Hill Climb, a historic event in Worcester, but she largely disappeared from the public eye soon after. Sadly, Cowell's financial difficulties continued throughout the rest of her life.
Which goes to show you when you're a woman, it's just harder to earn a buck.
Yes. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
Poor Betty. So she just found it very hard to secure employment and suffered from discrimination, which forced her to eventually just quit racing altogether.
Wow. Yeah.
Again,
the avenues were not as open for women.
No. And again, like she made a big choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after Lisa Morel's death in the 1980s, Roberta lived in Richmond, London, and had a small, close circle of friends. There was a woman named Jane Ormerod, and they both had gardens that bordered on each other. So they would just chat and garden and talk. And Jane said of Roberta, she was an extremely private person, though she could be garrulous after a glass of wine, which I love. She loved to talk about her racing and her flying, and her dream was that she would someday fly again.
Aw.
That's sad.
Yeah, that is sad.
Roberta also befriended the owner of the local garage, and they'd often talk about cars and her time in racing. She was a strong lady, very proud and independent, he said. Both celebrated and marginalized, Cowell continued to withdraw from the spotlight and eventually moved into sheltered housing in Hampton, England in 1990. Sheltered housing, by the way, is like assisted living.
Aww.
And she lived there for the rest of her life. Her neighbors, they described her as reclusive and private. And this private nature endured to the end of her days. She died on October 11th, 2011. At the age of 93.
Wow, she lived a long life.
Her funeral was only attended by 6 people, including Jane Ormerod. When Ormerod was clearing out the flat after Roberta had died, she went and cleared out her flat.
Oh,
isn't that nice?
That is nice.
Yeah. And she came across a large enamel sign, which Betty had made for her last business venture. It was white with Roberta Cowell Racing in bright red letters on it. It was a lovely thing, said Jane. There were no flowers at Betty's funeral per her request, so we just put the enamel sign over the coffin instead and buried her with it. It just seemed appropriate.
Oh, that's so touching.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely?
That is lovely.
Oh, go Jane. Incredible as it sounds, the general public only learned of her death 2 years later, in 2013, when an article recounting Cowell's life was finally printed in the Independent newspaper. And that's when her daughters learned of her death. It's a relief to know something at last, said her youngest daughter, Diana. And she ended up doing an interview with the Independent when she was 69. And over the years, she had reached out to Roberta, but she had never received any response. Despite that hurt, she described her feelings for Roberta, and she said she felt really proud of the person that her father had been.
Oh.
And the woman that he had become.
Wow, that's a pretty gracious and mature female, in her own right.
And to
Good for her,
she can still say her father, right? Yeah, because that was her father.
It was her father.
So she said, this was a woman that stood up for herself. She did what she felt was right. And, what can you do? I think her actual words, this is the daughter quoting her father, it's easier to change a body than a mind.
Wow.
Yeah. She was an extraordinary woman, Diana said. I would have loved to have met her and to have been with her before she died to let her know how I felt.
Wow.
We are family, I would have said. And what happened, there is a bond that nothing can ever change. What a great lady.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with her.
No resentment. No, I'm sure she endured a lot.
Sure.
And they don't mention the other daughter.
Right.
So who knows?
That was pretty remarkable to come to that.
And I'm sure it led to a big struggle.
Yeah.
But she recognized, who Roberta was, which is pretty powerful.
That is.
In fact, if you're listening, we would love to interview you.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I heard she does interviews sometimes.
Oh, wow.
That would be amazing.
That would be.
So Roberta Cowell's brave decision to change her life for her own betterment and ultimately for the world's betterment.
Yes.
And to let the world in on her most intimate of stories, whatever her reason, is truly remarkable. She brought trans issues to the forefront and sparked a wider conversation about gender in society before anybody else was willing to do that.
Wow. Missy, this is amazing.
I know. Isn't it? Yeah. And lastly, she pioneered the way forward for gender reassignment and gender recognition in the UK, and this is her legacy. She is indeed a Sheela.
She is indeed a Sheela.
Right?
Yay.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I was just so moved by her story, and I've thought so much about her. And do look at her pictures. I mean, she's lovely.
I can't wait.
She's so freaking cool. And the one thing I hesitate to touch on this because I don't want to soil this wonderful story, but I think it's also important to address just in all transparency because I'm sure people will be researching her after this. I just want to point out she did get a little loony in her reclusiveness. She got a little loony at some point, and she wasn't quite making some sense toward the end of her life. And there were some quotes where she said things like, well, I don't know what's going on today. I mean, I was actually a woman. I had women parts. I was, I had the right to transition. I wasn't just deciding I was a woman, which really fucking sucks because it really discredits so much of like what she did.
Because she lived to such a long time and because I'm familiar with family members who have dementia, she may have just gotten old and disoriented.
Yeah, and I want to chalk it up to that because that undermines so much, and I really resisted. I didn't even want to read about that. And again, you might not find it because, like I said, I was down long tunnels.
Yeah.
But I do want to point that out that I don't want somebody to say, hey, did you happen to know that later on she said this shit? Because, and people are bound to do that. But it doesn't change what she did or how she affected the world and how she paved that path. It doesn't change that. So I do want to just point that out because you might read something like that. I also want to take a moment here because we just launched our podcast. If you're listening to this, our podcast has now launched officially. And we want to give a shout out to some of those people who have supported us.
Oh, we've had some amazing
Oh my God, we've had so much support. And if you came to our podcast launch, you may be listening to this, either after we have 3 podcast launches, actually. We decided to do 3. We did one in the Valley, which presumably has happened already.
In the San Fernando Valley. Not everybody's from California.
In the Valley.
In the Valley.
Oh my God. And then we did one in the kind of the east side of LA, which is kind of where I live. And then
LA as in Los Angeles, not Louisiana.
Oh, see, God, I didn't think about these things, right? And then we're doing, or like I said, it might be did at this point, an Orange County launch. But people supported us in these launches, and we want to support them. So I'm going to start out here, just a quick shout out to an amazing woman named Heather Eaton. Heather Eaton. She lives in Dana Point, where she is an amazing esthetician. I have never, I swear, I've had a few facials with her now, but I have never experienced anything like one of her facials. It is something, it is such self-care. It is beyond a facial. And she will just like get you all cuddly and snuggle you up and just make you feel so important. I felt like a little guilty almost. I know I shouldn't, but I just want to say her studio is called Beauty and Blade. And it's where you can receive holistic medical skincare, wellness, and TLC, and that is for sure. She offers customized beauty therapies and treatments to achieve the best version of yourself. So she also does, like, in addition to facials, she does waxing, she does so many different things. So you'll just want to give her a phone call if you'd like to come to her studio and check it out. Her number is 949-466-4046. I live in LA. She's in Dana Point in Orange County. I will tell you, it is worth the drive. You can also reach her at peaceloveandhappyskin@gmail.com. So we highly recommend that. On that note, we're going to say thank you so much. We love you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Sheela, Sheela, Sheela.